Hey y'all. Okay, here we are. It's happening. I'm filming the Q&A. I have this cute top on for moral support. This top was actually PR. I'm really feeling myself in it, and I love that I was able to get something like this in PR. It's from the brand Shabby Chic, which I think is sold at Target because I feel like I used to have a sheets set, like the first sheets set that I ever bought for myself when I was in college and it had ruffles on it. I feel like that was from the brand Shabby Chic. Is it the same thing? I don't know, but obviously I'll link this down below. I'm really glad that they sent it to me. I'm also wearing a lip product that I just got in PR and I'm so impressed by it. It's the Clarins Instant Light Natural Lip Perfector. It's like the iconic, I think this is like an iconic Clarins product. Really into that too. So I have my armor on and I'm gonna answer questions about myself. It smells like cotton candy and I'm kind of here for it today. I also have a little bit of lip liner. Speaking of Q&A questions, someone asked me recently if I'd had any work done. The answer to that is absolutely no. I've never had any kind of cosmetic surgery or anything done, not even Botox, even though all the kids are doing it these days. But I think it's because I've started overlining my lips a little bit with a lip liner, and she was like, Hannah, your lips. If this is your first time to my channel, then thank you for clicking on a Q&A as your first video. There's probably nobody out there who's clicked on this as their first video. But if it happens to be your first time, or if you just need a refresher, my name is Hannah. I love beautiful things, but I don't love overspending. So on this channel, I discuss the challenge of improving our lives by indulging in our love of beautiful things, but without going overboard. And if you're not subscribed, I hope that you will go ahead and subscribe right now. Let's go ahead without any further ado and get into the meat of this video. This top did come with a cami, like a layer, like it was like a little, cami that matches it underneath so that it's not so sheer. But of course I'm wearing it without the cami. I'm just wearing like a bralette underneath it and I think it's much more my speed. I am nervous. So here is the story about the Q&A. I said I was going to do a Q&A like way back during my no buy year. If you've been watching me since then, you'll remember I solicited questions in a video, got a bunch of great questions. I was all fired up to do it, and then I just never did it. There's something that kind of blocks me from really delving into like talking about myself. I mean, I obviously talk about myself a lot on my channel. It's like my YouTube channel. That's all I do kind of is talk about myself. I mean, I review stuff too. I guess there are videos that are less focused on me. But I just, I am actually a dyed-in-the-wool introvert in spite of my love of people, in spite of my performative nature when I get around people. On an energetic level, I'm an introvert. So when I give of myself in this way, it feels scary and exhausting, and I can sometimes feel drained. And I think that that is what has caused me to put this off for so long. But I'm prepared today. I'm going to do it. So the questions this time, rather than soliciting them on another video, I solicited them from my Patreon patrons. And they are so good. The questions are really good. I'm sure I'm not going to be able to answer them all. I'm just going to go through and answer the ones that I feel prepared to answer now and that I feel like I can give a good answer for. But I will try to go through on the post in my Patreon and answer the questions that I didn't get a chance to answer in the Q&A. So if you are one of my Patreon patrons, make sure that you go back and check the post after you've watched this video, because there will be more little answers there, either full answers to things that I didn't get to in the video or reasons why I wasn't able to or I'm not able to answer certain questions. I will timestamp the first question down below in case you want to skip the next couple minutes of the video, because I'm going to just explicitly thank my Patreon patrons right now for the questions and also just for supporting me on Patreon. There are currently 323 of you, and what you are doing is making a significant impact on my pay per hour for my work on YouTube. And right now in my life with my current circumstances, what that means is that by supporting me on Patreon, you're earning me the right to prioritize the filming of my videos. You're earning me that right with Joe, with my household, with myself. You're making it so that I can afford to keep producing 3 or 4 videos a week instead of having to drop down to 1 or 2. You are also, and I don't think that I have said this yet on YouTube or even over on my Patreon, but you are also giving me the freedom to be picky about sponsorships and other kinds of paid work on YouTube. So over the past couple of months, there have been some offers for me to do paid work, like offers to do sponsored videos, that I didn't feel like were the right fit, but because of my current circumstances, I might have felt pressured to take those jobs if it wasn't for the support that I'm getting on Patreon. I think about you every day, and I marvel every day at your participation in this project of mine, and I'm endlessly grateful. I'm not sure where the next couple of years will take me and my channel and my other creative work, because so much is uncertain. But one thing is certain, and that is wherever it is that I am able to take my work in the next couple of years, it will be because of your support now. Okay, it's happening. Okay, so first on the draw in answering my call for questions was Sarah, and she said, "I'd love to hear a story time of how you and Joe met." And then she says, "But I understand if that's a special memory you want to keep private, but it's fine." I mean, it is a special memory, but I can tell you. So without going into too much background detail, because it would take forever, it would like take the whole video to tell the story of kind of like why I was where I was and what I had been doing and what Joe had been doing and how we got to be where we were. I will just say that we met at a tango festival in Ann Arbor, Michigan. When we met there, neither of us lived there. We had both come there for the tango festival. For me, it was my first festival. I had started dancing tango just within the previous year. I don't even think I had a year under my belt yet of dancing tango. But Joe had been dancing for 6 years. He had really worked on his dance, developed it. He was doing a little bit of teaching, and he was a highly sought after tango DJ at that time. So at a tango festival, there are several events, each of which needs a DJ, several milongas, that's the word for a tango dance. So say the festival goes from Thursday to Monday, there's gonna be an afternoon dance and an evening dance on each one of those nights, and then sometimes there's an all-nighter, so it'll go from 1 a.m. until maybe 6, so whenever the evening dance ends, it'll start and then it'll go through the night. So at any given tango festival, the organizers have to bring in, 10 tango DJs. So at this festival in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Joe had been brought from Portland, Oregon, where he was living at the time. He was DJing the big Saturday night milonga, and I had just happened to be passing through Ann Arbor, and I decided to stay for the tango festival because I'd never been to one, and I was really, really into tango because I had just started, and it was just like blowing my mind. It was all I wanted to do. So I was all fresh-faced and bushy-tailed, and it was like my first tango festival, and I was like, OMG, OMG, I'm gonna like learn so much. I'm gonna see all the people, I'm gonna dance. And it was the first night. There was a class before the evening milonga. And because I was such a new dancer, I was like, I'm gonna attend every class that I can attend. I'm gonna see all the different teachers and learn everything I can. So I was just in the class, in my tango outfit, in my brand new tango heels, just like being a really good student and just like ready to soak it all in. And Joe walked in through the door of the ballroom. And Joe doesn't want to be on my channel. Like, he doesn't want his face on my channel. He always says that he doesn't want to perform, but you can see his face on my Instagram account, or if you follow him on Instagram. It's not like he wants to hide his face. He just doesn't want to be a dancing monkey on my channel, which is perfectly fine. But he's very tall and he's swarthy. At that time, he was kind of like at full like wavy, flowy hair. And he's just kind of like gritty looking, you know what I mean? He's he's very alluring to a little Hannah. A little early 20s Hannah. I mean, he's still very alluring to a little Hannah, but at the time. So I saw him and I was like, who is that? I was like, I'm gonna meet that man. He also is very tall and thin and has a very long torso and has trouble finding shirts that fit him. So back before I got my hands on his shirts and like tailored them all to fit him with my sewing machine, he was wearing all of these big blousy shirts that were just swimming around him, floating in the air like a giant cloud. And it was because for a shirt to be like long enough in the arms, it had to be really big. And so he was wearing all these like oversized shirts that he'd gotten from thrift shops, and those were all his shirts. So he was wearing this big floaty white shirt. As I got to know him better when we started dating, I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. We need to tailor your shirts. But at the time, because I didn't know him, I felt like even that was very romantic. And he has very dark hair. So it was like this crisp white shirt, dark flowing hair. He has like a dark aspect, like thunder clouds around him all the time. And of course, I found that very alluring too. So I did my best to make eyes at him that evening and succeeded. And eventually we were kind of making eyes at each other across the event. Then we just started talking in between songs, dancing, and the rest was kind of like instantaneously history. We had a fling that weekend. We had a whirlwind affair, and we stayed in touch. And I didn't instantly move to Portland. That was where he lived at the time, but I eventually moved to Portland. And when I moved to Portland, here's how it happened. Joe flew to North Carolina, where my mom lived at the time. And that's where I was. I had other things. I had like 3 or 4 months of things lined up that I was still doing, like writing residencies and this job that I had in Belgium. But then I was at my mom's house, and we drove from my mom's house in North Carolina to Portland in my car, which was my first car, my car at the time. It was a 1989 Lincoln Town car that had belonged to my grandfather. And when he passed away, it was kind of up for grabs in the family, and I needed a car. So I bought it for $1 from my grandmother. It was the best car, but it was totally ridiculous. I'll try to put a picture up on the screen right now. It was called the Triple White because it was like white paint, white thingy on the back of the cab on the exterior, and white leather seats on the inside. But I packed everything that I owned into that car, and Joe and I drove it across the country to Portland. And we moved in with him. He at the time was living in a tiny room in the basement of a famous tango studio called Tango Baratine, a dance studio. It was like a little windowless room. The room was directly underneath the dance floor. So whenever anyone was dancing, if we were down in our room, it was like creaky up there and loud. You could like hear the people's feet moving. You could hear the music. It was, I moved right into the heart of this tango community and into this studio. And just in case anyone's out there with stars in their eyes about romance, that was when the real work began. Right? Like we fell in love, and it was all romantic and dramatic, and we were young and foolish, and we were like, we're going to be together, and we're going to live in this room together underneath the floor of a tango studio. And then it became very difficult, and we've spent the 11 years since then. I mean, it hasn't been difficult the whole time, but we've spent the 11 years since then making compromises, getting to know each other, getting to know ourselves better, swallowing our pride, making ourselves change, intermittently going to therapy, and, just becoming better people together. So it was really exciting at the beginning. It was really magical feeling at the beginning, but then it became something that you have to work for, which is what long-term relationship is. So Sarah then came back with another question. She says, also, what is your favorite meme? And I love this question because I do have a meme preference. I love the memes that rhyme. So in YouTube comments when people are like, she protect, she attack, but she's not going to give your clothespins back or whatever. Like that's like a metered rhyming meme. It's basically a poem, a meme that's a poem. If it rhymes, it's my favorite. So Jessica asks, do you think packing away so much of your stuff, like your books, could mean in a year or so you might feel differently about owning them, like a form of unintentional minimalism? So she's referring to the fact that I've moved into this space in someone else's house, and we weren't able to bring most of our own stuff with us. So our art, most of my books, and a lot of our furniture. And so the question is kind of when it gets unpacked, like when we move into the next phase and we're able to have our stuff around us again, do you think it'll be like, oh, I didn't miss this? And yeah, there is a chance at that, although I think that we lived in such a small space already. Like we lived in a studio apartment, and we had pared down our stuff such that we really will need, if we move to another apartment or to a house after this, we will need our furniture. And I have a feeling that when it gets delivered and we start putting it in the new space, we'll be like, oh, thank goodness we kept this butcher block. Thank goodness we kept this couch, because otherwise we would need to buy a couch, or we would need to buy a chair. And we kind of have planned for that eventuality because we're paying to store our stuff. So if it wasn't going to end up being really worth it, it's like worth the money that it's costing for us to store it, then we would just have gotten rid of it. And we did get rid of some things. So I hope that we have calibrated that correctly. We'll find out when we start unpacking our stuff. I can't imagine not being excited to be reunited with my books and with my artwork. I think it may depend heavily on where we go after this and what kind of situation we end up in. But if it's anything as big or bigger than the studio apartment that we were in before, then there will be a place for everything that we put in storage. So in a similar vein, Natasha says, I'm curious what books and what kinds of books you brought with me. So she's referring to the fact that I packed most of my books into storage, but that I have a selection. There's actually a shelf above, like out of frame, and that's where all of my books are. And she's asking, like, what are the books? So she says she has the hardest time narrowing her books down when she has to, and she wants to know how I did. I think I'm going to film a book tour of the books that I brought with me. Like kind of like the art tour that I did at the old apartment, where I'll just go through the shelf that's up there that's out of frame and show you every single book and tell you why I chose to keep it out of storage. Would you be interested in that? That would be like a whole video in response to Natasha's question. Kate says, as someone in year 2 of my MFA who's struggling to write, even in the program, how do you keep writing after graduation? What, if anything, is inspiring you now? This is a great kind of tough question. I think that the most surefire way to write, to keep writing, is to schedule it, to set aside time every day during which you do it, no matter what. Whether it's good, it's bad, you're inspired, you're not inspired, and whether or not you're producing the work that you think that you should be producing, the work that you were planning to produce, whatever it is you're doing, you're devoting that time, you're sitting down during that time, and you're working on your work. And it's interesting because Kate has this 2-phase question, right? She says, how do you keep writing after graduating? And then she says, what, if anything, is inspiring you now? And I think that my answer to the question is actually that those two things, you have to separate them from each other. If you wait until you're inspired to start writing, you'll spend a lot of your days waiting. And what you want to do is spend a lot of your days writing, or all of your days writing. I always think of Seamus Heaney's statement that you have to keep practicing it. You have to keep, I can't remember the exact phrasing of the first part of what he said, but he basically said you have to like keep developing the muscle by going through the paces of writing, even when you don't feel like you're writing your work. And you do that so that when you are inspired, the thing that you write won't be stillborn. That's the actual phrase that he used that I always remember. So I will sit down, and I'm not doing as good a job of it here right now because the past month has been a little bit chaotic. We've just been getting used to our new schedules and getting settled. But in my old life, before we moved here, and this is also what I aspire to institute in the coming months, I'm like, actually, I feel right on the cusp of really putting this practice back in place. My ideal writing routine is that I get up in the morning and, sometimes I'll get ready, or sometimes I'll just get a little bit of coffee and go straight to it. But I sit down and I'm like, okay, I'm going to work on my writing until, I don't know, like 8 or 9. Like if I'm up at 6 or 6:30, or I'm up at 6, I'm sitting down with my computer at 6:30, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to work on my writing until 9. And I know that, and everybody knows that. I'm not scheduled to do anything before 9. Everyone knows not to bother me before 9. If there are other people who I have to tell not to bother me, like, because now I live with other people, so I'm going to be telling them, like, this is my writing time. And then during that time, I have to be working on my writing. Best case scenario is that I'm actually writing work. Like I have had an idea for a poem and I jotted down a few lines the night before, and then I wake up the next morning, I sit down in my chair, and then I'm actually working on that poem. That's fantastic, because like that's what we all want, right? We want to be producing the work. But if that's not possible for me, if I'm not inspired, I do the next best thing, which in some cases is revising. Like I'll go back into my work, I'll revise it, I'll take the draft of something that's not finished, pick it apart, stick it back together, try to optimize it, try to edit it down. And then if that isn't really on the table, I will just do stream of consciousness, journaling, writing lines. Sometimes I'll just write a page full of iambic pentameter sentences. like lines in iambic pentameter. I'll just write in iambic pentameter for a page and then see what that turns into. I'll just do anything, anything. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to be the project that you thought you were working on. It doesn't have to be what you want to write. You just have to be doing it, right? So that's like keeping the muscle, keeping the wheels greased, kind of. And then if you do that for 2 or 3 days, then on the third day, when you do have a great idea, the wheels are already greased and it doesn't feel so hard to do it well, to get it out. If that's not on the table for me, if I really, really, really can't bring myself to do it, if I'm in that moment where I'm like feeling really bad about myself, or I'm anxious, or I just like, sometimes it just feels like starting writing is going to be like jumping into a cold pond and you just can't do it today because you're feeling too tender. If I'm having that kind of day, I'll do the next best thing, the next level down, which is submissions, sending my work out to magazines for publication, contacting editors, emailing any contacts that I have, sometimes emailing old friends who are also writers, like just basically the work side, the business side of it. That's the stuff that I do on the days when I can't bring myself to actually write. And to be honest, that policy in my life is the only reason that I've ever gotten anything published, because it's hard to get yourself to send stuff out for publication. But because I make myself do it every time I can't fill my writing time with actual writing, eventually the numbers game, you know, I've sent enough stuff out that eventually like 1 or 2 things will pay off every once in a while. So I hope that answers your question, Kate. I didn't go on to answer the question of what is inspiring me now, because really I think that it's a matter of doing your writing work as if it's a job, even when you're not being paid for it, even when you don't feel like it, even when you're not inspired. That's what keeps me going. That is what has kept me writing after graduation, even when you don't feel like there's an audience for it. Right? Even if there's no setting, no vision of like where it will end up, who will end up reading it, nobody's expecting it. You just have to continue to hold your own feet to the fire. So Jen asks, if you could offer one piece of advice to creatives of all types, what would it be? I think, and I don't know if this is like my final answer, but this is the thing that springs to mind right now. Think about your level of perfectionism mindfully. Like, plan for, decide on your level of perfectionism for any given project, and make sure that you're doing it consciously rather than just allowing your knee-jerk level of perfectionism to make your decisions for you. So for example, when I am working on a poem, my level of perfectionism is very, very high. That's the realm in which I'm the most perfectionist. I want each of my poems that I publish to be truly perfect versions of themselves. I'm obsessive. I will take forever. I will go back and back and back. I will not let it go, let it out into the world, let it be published until I feel like it is beyond a shadow of a doubt crystalline, like an absolutely pure, perfect gem. And I have decided on that. It's natural to me, but I also am aware of it. And I've decided that that is what I want. That's the kind of poet that I want to be, this kind of writer that I want to be. And I'm willing to spend the time and energy. I'm willing to put that level of brain power into perfecting that work. And that's partly because I feel like that's my most important work in the world. And so I'm at 110% for perfectionism in that work. When it comes to generating that work, like just, working on generating material, I set that perfectionism aside because you have to kind of be messy when you're generating work. But when it comes to finishing it, polishing it, when it comes to deciding that it's done, I have very, very high, like astronomically high standards for my work. But when it comes to YouTube videos, for example, when I started my YouTube channel, hey y'all, hi. So here's what happened. I lost a clip from the footage that I took yesterday. So today is another day. It's the day after I filmed my Q&A, and I was editing it this morning and I realized that there was a clip missing. My camera just shut down mysteriously in the middle of filming yesterday, and I thought that it was because the battery needed to be replaced. when the battery needs to be replaced, it sometimes shuts itself down, but it saves the footage that it had been recording. But something else happened yesterday. There was some kind of glitch or fluke, and my camera shut off and it didn't save the footage that it had been recording. Luckily, all that we lost was the second half of the question that I was just answering, the question about advice for creatives of all types, and then the first half of the next question. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill in right now, and then we'll go back to all of the rest of the footage. The vast majority of it is just fine, so you'll be back to my lace blouse and my hair down in just a second. But let me just let you know what I was going to say. So I had just said that when I'm working on my poetry, I allow my perfectionism to have free reign, and I allow myself to hold myself to a really, really high standard when I'm finishing and polishing my poetry and getting ready to send it out in the world. But when it comes to my YouTube channel, I have much lower standards of polish and perfectionism by necessity, because when I started my YouTube channel, I didn't know how to run a YouTube channel. I didn't know how to film myself. I didn't know how to be on camera. I didn't know how to speak in such a way that it makes it easier for me to edit myself. I didn't know what would read well on camera and what wouldn't read well on camera. I didn't know how to set up lights. I didn't know how to set the camera settings, the sound. I didn't know how to edit. I didn't know any of it. And I decided that rather than putting myself through some sort of boot camp and practicing over and over again and getting really good at all those things before I started the channel, I decided that I wanted to go ahead and start the channel and then learn as I went along. And I'm still doing that. I'm still learning as I go along. But what that meant was that I had to settle for really imperfect stuff all throughout. This whole time, all the way up until now, and I'm still having to settle for it. This is a perfect example, actually. A really perfectionist Hannah would have scrapped the entire Q&A and filmed it all over again, so as not to have to come in and film this little interstitial bit in different makeup on a different day and explain that there was a problem and talk about the camera and all that stuff. My purest perfectionism doesn't like that this is going on, but I have lowered that bar. I have allowed myself to accept that my YouTube project is one where I keep my perfectionism in check, and that is what has allowed me to do it at all, to make the work at all. So basically my advice to creatives is that you don't have to have the same level of polish in every project across the board. And conversely, you don't have to have the same level of messiness across the board. Some people, some creative people, struggle with the fact that they don't tend to polish things. They don't have the perfectionist gene, so they'll do things and it'll always kind of be messy and unfinished and be sloppy, and they'll move on to the next thing before they finish the first thing. So whether you're coming at it from the tendency towards perfectionism or coming at it from the other direction where you think you could use a little bit of perfectionism, don't think of every project as having the same standards of those kinds of things. Realize that some projects can be left messy. Some projects need to be messy in order to ever get off the ground. And in some cases, you can take your time and you can allow yourself to be more exacting, to pay more attention to the details, and to get yourself to a place of a higher level of polish. You can change the calibration on a project by project basis. So that was the rest of the answer to that question that got cut off. And then the next question comes from Michelle. Michelle had a couple of statements and a couple of questions all in one paragraph. And again, I just chose the one that I felt the most drawn to answering. And that is this: did you sing camp songs as a camp counselor? And if so, which is your favorite? Mine is called Say Hey Josephine. And I actually don't know the song Say Hey Josephine. That wasn't one of the camp songs that we sang at my camp. But the answer is a resounding yes, that singing camp songs was a huge feature of my summers when I was working as a camp counselor. Every night after the campers went to bed, all of the staff would gather in a central location in the middle, sort of like in a place that was equidistant from all of the tents the campers were sleeping in, and we would sing songs for like sometimes up to an hour, but like a half hour to an hour, a bunch of songs all in a row. We would sing the campers to sleep. And that is a tradition that went all the way back to when I was a camper at this camp. So I remembered being a camper and falling asleep to these songs. And then when I came back as a staff member, I would sing the songs. There were always new songs coming in, and You know, we were always teaching each other songs, learning songs. The way that we sang the songs would evolve. It was just like this organism that existed as part of camp life would be all of the songs that we would sing. There is a really great old Appalachian song that it wasn't one of the ones that we used to sing all the time at the camp counselor circle, but I learned it as a camp counselor and used to sing it a lot, that I think is my favorite. And I don't even really know where it comes from. The version that I learned, the first verse goes, one morning, one morning, one morning in May, I overheard a married man to a young girl say, go and dress ye up, pretty Sadie, and come along with me across the blue mountain to the Allegheny. It goes on, but I won't. Also, I think that it's not Sadie. In the version I learned, it was Katie, but I started singing Sadie years ago because of our cat Sadie, so that's the way I sing it now. Anna asks, what are your top 5 Lacroix or fizzy water flavors? And what is one book of poetry you would recommend right now? So the Coke, the Nicola Coke flavored, I actually just lucked out and found it at the grocery store the last time I placed an order. And so I really love that one. That's my favorite one. And then after that, I would say, oh, I recently had the chance to try an apricot Lacroix. And that is amazing, but I haven't been able to find it anywhere. And then underneath that, it's like grapefruit, lemon, lime. Not lime, I don't like the lime one. Grapefruit, lemon, tangerine. One book of poetry you would recommend right now? I don't know, man. It depends on your own experience with poetry and what you have read. I have been rereading Sylvia Plath lately, so that's kind of what I would recommend. I really like Plath because she has a very strong musical sense. So there are rhythms, there's repetition, there's rhyme. You can really get into it musically. You can kind of get your guts into it pretty easily without worrying too much about what it means. And at the same time, the language isn't antiquated. It feels like pretty contemporary sentences, like in terms of the syntax. And so it's easy for a contemporary reader to read it. So I feel like Plath is like a good meeting of those requirements. So maybe that. Ariel gets a lot of attention. I really like her book, Crossing the Water. So I'm going to give that as my answer. Sylvia Plath's Crossing the Water. I'll link it down below. There's a great poem in there, The Babysitters. It's such a good poem about thinking back. Like it's a good poem about how quickly childhood and youth kind of pass. The last line is, everything has happened. Oh my gosh, it's such a good book. This is it. I just went and got it from my shelf. Yeah, The Babysitters. At the end, it says, the shadows of the grasses inched round like hands of a clock, and from our opposite continents we wave and call. Everything has happened. It's not quite the same. Just hearing the last 3 lines, you have to read the whole poem. So Catherine asks, if you could choose where to live based on scenery or landscape alone, what would it look like? That is easy for me. Middle of the woods. I would like to live in the woods, maybe near a creek or something, but my dream house is one that has aspects of like a tree house, where you really feel like the trees around you, the trees out the windows. Eva or Ava asked about my voting plan for this year. I live in California and I'm registered to vote here, so I get a ballot in the mail where just vote by mail all over the state. It's a locked-in system. We've been doing it for years, which is great this year. But then she goes on to say that it's important to normalize talking about being a voter. And, I have been talking recently about how important it is to have a voting plan in place, especially if you don't live in a vote by mail state. So I'm glad that that has come up. But yeah, my ballot is going to come here to the house in which I currently live, and I will mail it back. Oh, Abigail has asked a real doozy. So she says, I find you quite a wise and insightful person. Thanks, Abigail. How do you think you became like that? I feel like I'm struggling to answer this question on the premise, like the premise of the question is you're a wise and insightful person. I'm having a really hard time answering the question like how did you become a wise and insightful person? Because I know there are people who are so much wiser than I am and more insightful than I am. Like it's hard for me to like start from that premise, but I think I can start from the premise that I can handle, and that's what I think that this question is reacting to, which I think has to do with critical thinking. So thinking about all sides of something, maybe being willing to push through the first knee-jerk reaction to something, or the first way that you would maybe consider saying something, and to hold yourself to task to like say it better or say it more accurately, or think about it maybe in a new way or from a new angle. Those are things that I do try to do. And so the question of like why I try to do that, and how I became someone who tries to do that, that is something that I think that I can answer. I cannot really give any other answer besides reading. Like I just I read a lot, and I've read a lot for my whole life. And I've read recently, especially a lot of creative nonfiction. Essayists, people who write personal essays, are really good at kind of like pushing through the membrane of like the initial thought that you might have, or the initial reaction that you might have, pushing through to the other side and then pushing deeper again into the question. People who write personal essays are also often good at having like a certain kind of sense of humor about themselves that allows them to have more expansive thinking. I think that a certain kind of humility, a certain kind of acceptance of one's own imperfection or one's own foibles is required in order to be that kind of critical thinker, because it takes a lot of bandwidth to protect your own interests, or like to protect your own sense of self. And if you're using up all of your bandwidth to make sure that everybody thinks that you're right all the time, or that you're untouchable, or that you can't be questioned, that you're polished, if you're using up a lot of bandwidth for that, then it's like you don't have enough of the required power to dig deeper. So I really love reading work from people whose voices have that kind of humility and humor and interrogation. It just helps me feel like that is a good way to be. It helps me be more okay with being that way. So that's my number one answer. Then the other adjacent answer is like being with people who are like that. So having known people, having had mentors and friends who have critical thinking skills, and who are humble enough and have senses of humor enough about themselves to live that way. Learning from them, watching them, and again, having them show me that it's okay to be that way has given me license, I think, to dig deeper in my thinking. I also find that kindness, defaulting to kindness, gives rise to a kind of insightfulness in almost every situation. So when you are talking about something or someone, or turning over a question in your mind about a situation, often there isn't a default to kindness. Like we really struggle with that these days in our culture. And so I find that sometimes if I think empathetically about the villain in the situation, or the person causing the problem, or the people who have done something that everyone's confused about, or whatever, if you try to put yourself in their shoes and think about it from their perspective, really empathize and think, what is it that's reasonable? Like, what is it that would have caused a reasonable person to behave this way? Are they suffering? Are they traumatized? Are they afraid? Are they really proud and they like can't break through that pride? Do they feel like they're not safe? Like if you just come up with maybe like a likely answer for why it is that this like evil or troubled person or troublesome person might be doing all these horrible things, introducing that kind of empathy into the discussion often reads as deep insight, because it's not usually the first response. So that is another way to answer that question. I think that if you aspire to be a more insightful person, one trick is just to default to empathy for everyone involved in any given situation. Okay, so my dear Courtney has put a long list of questions, but again, I'm just going to pick the one that I think will read the best here. And I also think it's the one that she most wanted me to answer. So she says, why, if fewer nicer things is the goal and you know you use them a lot and love certain shades the actual most, why would you not purchase a Natasha Denona palette if all of your makeup was stolen? So she rephrased the question a couple of times, but I feel like the crux of it is here at the end. She says that she always feels like when I say that I wouldn't buy a Natasha Denona palette with my own money, there's a little bit of like an I'm not allowed to love beautiful things too much or else I'm bad. So she's always left wondering if that's what I feel or if that's what I think I'm supposed to feel. So she's basically like calling me out for how I have said a number of times on my channel that I wouldn't buy a Natasha Denona palette with my own money. And indeed, I have never bought a Natasha Denona palette with my budget or with my own money. And she's saying like, isn't, because I love, for example, the gold palette so much, isn't it a prime example of the fewer nicer things that would be worth spending one's money on? I might be wrong, and it might be that if I was totally starting over from nothing, I would just do it and be done with it. And I would be like, well, there goes my $125, but now I have the gold palette and now I kind of like don't need that much more. I think, I do a lot of this on my channel, sort of predicting what I would do if I didn't receive PR, then I would feel this way, or if I didn't have so much eyeshadow already, then maybe I would buy it. And I'm always only giving my best guess. Like you can't entirely know for sure exactly how you would behave in any given situation. But I still do think that my best guess is that I would rather just have like a handful of curated singles from Cleona and maybe a couple of other places and like just build a little custom palette, because the gold palette, as much as I love it, there are only certain shades that I really use. Like there are maybe 5 shades out of the palette that I'm like obsessed with and I'm constantly using, that I'm constantly panning and all of this stuff. The palette itself, it feels like I would be spending a lot of money to buy more than what I actually need and use. So if I were really starting from scratch, I really think that that my definition of fewer nicer things in that circumstance would really skew not only towards nicer, but really towards fewer. And I would want to like cut out the fat. And so I wouldn't want to be buying a robust palette like that, especially not for so much money. So Holly has asked some really nice questions. She says, what is it about poetry that makes it so invaluable to you? I know you've mentioned before how poetry is your life's purpose, but since I don't hear that very often, I'm curious to know what sparks that connection. I'm going to cover this. I'm going to do another video and cover this. It might not be right away, but I'm planning some content about this. I'm planning to branch out a little bit to kind of give space for that side of myself to flourish on YouTube. I feel like now that I know how to make YouTube videos, I can do a better and more polished job of presenting this side of myself, talking about poetry on YouTube. So it's in the works, it's coming. But I will just say the answer to this is kind of connected to the earlier question about thought, about depth of thought and wisdom and insight. I think that poetry feeds the spirit and the brain, but the way in which it feeds the spirit, it deepens one's generosity, it deepens one's knowledge. It's almost like you're drinking from a well, like an age-old well of knowledge. Whatever poem you read, you know what I mean? Like good poems, poets throughout the ages are kind of like producing this work that allows you to suckle from wisdom, like age-old wisdom. It's something spiritual, it's something universal. And so that's why it's so invaluable to me, because I think that having a relationship with it, reading it frequently, thinking about it, being connected to it, develops my spirit, and that develops my wisdom and my ability to do my work in the world. And that's sort of the answer to your question. But more is coming in a future video. She also asks, is there something that we could do as Patreon supporters or subscribers to support you and your channel more effectively? That's a really sweet thing to say, but I hope that I've made it clear at the beginning of this video that just by being patrons, you are doing so much. Like you're doing so much. You have no idea. Like it is really incredible. I don't think I've ever said this on camera. I typed it out one time when I started my Patreon and I did the math, but I figured out it's different for every channel and it changes all the time because the algorithm, AdSense, it's very opaque. We don't really have a full understanding. You can't really get a full understanding of how it works from the other side, which is, I'm sure, by design. But when I started my Patreon, I went and did the math on my channel just from the past year. And I learned that for a viewer to earn me $1 in AdSense revenue, that viewer has to watch 200 videos and watch all the ads on all of those videos. So when you watch an ad on a video, you're earning me an insanely tiny amount of money, which is just to say that if you are one of my patrons and you've subscribed for $1 a month, just in 1 month, you're paying me more than you've ever earned me in AdSense over the course of my entire channel and over the course of all of your viewership of all of my videos. So I know that it feels like a small thing to a lot of you, but just in terms of the way that the math works out on my end, it's a really, really big thing. So you're already doing the most. So Elise says, would you please share what your style was like in your teens and 20s? And it would be great to see photos too. She says, one time you mentioned that you shaved your head and I would love to hear how that went. I totally did shave my head when I was a sophomore in college. And she asked to see photos. I don't know if I can drag up any photos, but if I can, I'll put them in. And what you'll see is that I really had no sense of style until like my early 20s. For a while, I was like ashamed of looking like I was trying to have a sense of style. I wanted to be glamorous and interesting, but I felt like there was something wrong with interesting. I mean, everyone's interesting in their own way. I wanted to have to be polished and to like have this fashionable femininity. But I felt like there was something wrong with that desire because I don't know, I didn't know very many people growing up who were like that. I felt like it was frivolous. And it took me a while to admit to myself that it really would give me great pleasure to embark on the project of styling myself and my life. And I think I was a senior in college before I finally allowed myself to like wear high heels and makeup and then kind of like the rest, I was off to the races, you know what I mean? And like the person that you see now is really a very obvious evolution of like how I was dressing then and what I was doing then. So it wouldn't really surprise you that much. But until then, I was a mess because I was constantly torn between the desire to enact this kind of, frivolous, joyful, robust femininity and the desire to really push back against capitalism and culture and sexism and the dictates. I was worried that my desire for femininity was something that should be obliterated from myself, that I should like dig out and destroy, that it was a kind of poison. I don't believe that anymore, but when I believed that, I was kind of all over the place in how I was dressing. I was a very late bloomer because it was a really complicated internal process for me of becoming comfortable with the thing that I think I innately really, really love, which is stylized femininity. It's part of why I love drag queens so much, because drag queens love stylized femininity and celebrate stylized femininity as a kind of superpower. And that really helps me to understand it as that and not to be ashamed of it or afraid of it. Margarita asks a cute little question. She says, are you not a fan of eyelash curlers? How come? I am not a fan of eyelash curlers, and it's because my lashes are gently curved already. When I curl them, they basically go whoop, like they go around and they're kind of long and then they like touch my eyelids and it's just horrible. It doesn't look cute. Eyelash curlers don't make me look cute. Jane says, I read your New York Times article about Sadie and Joe. I'll link that down below in case you have not read that. And since I'm under the impression that cats choose humans rather than the other way around, I wonder if you would share how Sadie chose you. So in the article, she says, I hint at how she chose Joe, which is true after I brought Sadie home from the SPCA, the Humane Society. That's what I'm trying to think of. That's what it was, the Portland Humane Society. Then when Sadie and Joe first met, there was a moment where they really kind of like fell for each other. So I write about that in the essay that Jane is talking about, but she wants to hear about the first time that Sadie and I ever met. So I went to the Humane Society and I was looking around at the kittens And, you know, they have the kittens in their individual little places. And then they had this like kitten area where there was like 20 kittens just loose. And you could go in the kitten area and pick a kitten and take it into a little private room and then just like kiki with it and see if you got along with it. So he went to the kitten area and he looked out over the kitten area and all the little kittens were going bananas and they're all so cute. And in the middle of them, Sadie was sitting there, tiny, striped, and she was giving her little self a bath. She was like washing her little ear, washing her little face. And first of all, it was really cute. She just looked so self-possessed. You know what I mean? She was like, just gonna take care of business real quick. She was grooming. She was taking extra good care of herself so that she could be the most effective kitten in the world. And that really appealed to me. I was like, this little kitten knows what's up. And I also know that when kittens are separated from their mothers too young, grooming is one of the things that they can struggle with. And that showed me, I saw Sadie cleaning herself, and that showed me that even though she was now an orphan, I don't know where the mother cat was, but clearly she was like up for adoption. Even though that was true, that she had probably spent those first crucial weeks with her own mother and learned the little things that little cats need to know. So that also really appealed to me. And then she looked up from her grooming and our eyes met. And I was like, I want to try that one. I was like, give me that one. I'm going to hold that one. So the attendant at the Humane Society got her from the kittenry. And I took her into a little room and sat on the floor with her. And she crawled up onto my lap and started purring. And I was like, you will be mine. I was like, it's you and me forever. And the rest was history. Oh, Alexandra asks a great question. She says her question is about being self-employed. To me, being self-employed sounds wonderful and scary at the same time, especially as a fellow human with perfectionist tendencies. How have you managed the stress and pressure of relying so fully on yourself for your income? It's not always easy, Alexandra. I have a tendency to overwork that stems from perfectionism. Did you also have that? I did and I do. And if you did, I do. How did you manage it? The question is, how do I manage it? Because it's an ongoing thing that I have to manage. So yeah, I love this question. I do have answers to it, but I don't know if I'm an expert. And I think it's something that I'm always learning. Like Joe and I are always working on it, always learning from each other, always refining our strategy about, working for ourselves and still managing to live good lives and be happy people. I think that the first part of the answer is maybe for people who have trouble with the other side of it, like being motivated. That's a question that I've gotten a lot from people. They're like, how do you stay on task if you're self-employed? And the answer to that is that you have to act like you have a boss. You have to you have to trick yourself into thinking that there is somebody who you're going to be disappointing if you don't do the tasks that you need to do on the schedule that you need to do them on in order to have things go smoothly. So for me, that's like, posting on schedule on YouTube. So sometimes I've had a really clear schedule, like I post on these days. Sometimes I've just done every other day. But when I decide that I have a schedule, I stick to it with the determination that I would stick to it if someone had hired me to stick to it, and then they had the power to fire me if I didn't. That is how faithful I am to it. And in theory, in essence, that is the case, because if I don't do it, it's not like I'll be immediately fired from my job on YouTube, but my channel will be less stable than it otherwise would be and potentially lose its grip, and the potential for loss is there. So even though it's a couple of degrees of separation between me like failing to post on time and me losing my job, the two things are connected. And you have to remember that. Like, you just have to live that way. Similarly, the thing about sitting down to do your writing work every day, whether you feel inspired or not, whether you have someone waiting for it or not, whether you're bringing it into workshop or not, it's like having the boss be your goals, your standards, and believing that the boxes have to be checked and the deadlines have to be met, even though the work isn't as structured and codified as it would be if someone else had hired you. The danger, though, that Alexandra is pointing out is the danger of going too far in that direction, right? Or I guess swinging too far in the other direction, because you know that that is a thing. And the key to success in this realm, the key to not overworking myself, is something that I really have learned from Joe, and that is clocking off. Joe has made clocking off a common parlance in our life, in our daily life. For years, like years and years ago, he introduced this idea to our life together. And the way that it gets used these days is he will say, I'm clocking off. At like 5:30 or something. I'll have been doing stuff all day, work stuff. And sometimes he will have not even been doing work stuff. He'll have spent a long period of time doing the dishes in the middle of the day, or, fixing something that was broken. And then he'll also have been working on his creative work, or his editing work, or scheduling, or doing our budget, like doing our books. It'll all have been a mix of different kinds of work, some housework, some his work, some work. And then at 5:30 or 6, he'll be like, I'm clocking off. He'll announce it for himself and for me. And that means that he's moving from productivity, active time to the rest of the evening, to not being on point, not working. And he'll ask me, like, when are you clocking off? Or if I'm working too late, he'll be like, why don't you go ahead and clock off? Like, just having a word for it, having this idea that a point comes in the day when you stop working, every kind of working, right? And you just move to your like after work self. That has really, really helped me. I think that if I didn't know Joe, if I had never met him and had my concept of how to be self-employed be transformed by him, and I lived alone, for example, I would just work. I would never clock off. And I'm really glad that he has helped me to learn to do that. So Jessica has asked some questions about communal living. She says, I would love to know the rules you've set up for the new living situation with 4 adults, 1 cat, 1 dog, and 1 baby in 1 household. And I'm going to cover that in a video with Julia. We're going to sit down together and film pretty soon, and we'll talk all about how the first month of communal living has gone. So stay tuned for that. Mia has asked, has being on YouTube changed the way you take criticism? Has it ever? Are there lessons that YouTube has taught you about this? I know it can be hard to take everyone's opinions in the comments, but I find that you handle it well. That's very nice. I'm glad that you find that. It doesn't always seem that way on my end, and it isn't always that way. I do have some very bad days because it is some tough shit, y'all. It is some tough shit being on YouTube and having to take people's often extremely invasively worded and assumptive comments. Like, people make these comments that are just full of assumptions that are wrong. It can be really frustrating when someone leaves a comment that assumes a bunch of things are true that aren't true, and there's no way to actually answer the question or the thing without going through and pointing out that the premises of it are all rotten. It's an extremely frustrating feeling that it makes me feel all blocked up and like sick. Like, it's just really it's really tough. But the answer to the question about evolution over time, or if this has changed for me over time, is just that my skin has gotten astronomically thicker by the week. Sometimes it feels like exponentially thicker. I've just grown a little bit of a thicker skin pretty much every single day that I've been on YouTube since the very beginning. But the other thing that I've done is that I've gotten much better at not not going after comments. Like, I don't go to Reddit anymore. It's sad because I loved that makeup rehab forum at the beginning. It was so wonderful during my no-buy year to be part of that community. But now the internet, that part of the internet, Reddit, and other like gossipy websites, that requires a huge amount of emotional labor for me to manage the reaction that I inevitably have. There is no way to be a person who goes in and reads a bunch of stuff about yourself like that and to not have a reaction. I mean, maybe you could get a super thick skin, like to the point where you're completely dull to it. Or maybe if I was like incredibly successful and famous and rich and just felt completely untouchable, then maybe I could get to the point where I could encounter stuff like that and truly not care. But you know, I don't know if that's in the cards for me ever. I don't think I can ever be that untouchable emotionally. So what that means is that when I read stuff like that, I have to manage my own emotions, and that takes time and it takes energy. And when I can keep from having to do that kind of management, especially when it's just from people who like I don't even know and like have no claim to me or my time, or people who I have no reason to like incorporate their input into like the way I'm living my life or the way that I'm running my channel. And in many cases, people who don't really get just don't really get me, like people who don't really understand what I'm doing, and they've just seen a couple of things and then jumped to conclusions, and then they're like going off. Like I just there's no reason to make it a part of my job on YouTube or a part of my daily life, to make it my business to have to ingest all of that garbage and then do the work of processing it and clearing myself from the nastiness that it engenders. I think, and this might not be the answer that you're looking for, Mia, because the question is like, has being on YouTube changed the way you take criticism? I think the implication there is like, you know, some people are like really great at not taking criticism personally or understanding that certain kinds of criticism are constructive and have a lot of equanimity about it and just like take it with a smile and be like, thank you so much. And like, yeah, I've gotten better at that since the beginning. I've gotten better at not taking things personally and understanding when criticism is constructive and stuff like that. But the thing that's changed the most is that I'm better at ignoring stuff that isn't constructive, and I'm better at not taking the bait when people who are, I think, sometimes trying to give constructive criticism, but really at the heart of what they're doing, it is a kind of trolling. Like they're phrasing things in such a way that it makes you feel like you have to defend yourself. I've gotten better at not taking that bait. And I'll tell you, I delete stuff. I delete comments if if they give me a bad feeling, I'll delete them because it's my website. It's my YouTube site. It's my space. And like there's too much garbage in the world for me to have to deal with comments that make me feel bad or make me feel anxious or make me feel like I need to defend myself, for them to just be there in my comment section on my videos. There are a lot of comments that I've never seen on past videos. Like I only read the comments for a couple of days after a video goes up. So I know there's probably a bunch of garbage about me out there on my own comment sections. I don't care. I don't care. All I care about is that like my quality of life and like me moving through the world, that's healthy. Like I just want to stay healthy and strong so that I can stay focused on doing my work in the world. So whether the comments are there or not, I don't care. It's whether I see them, right? So if I see one and it's really nasty and it makes me feel super bad, I used to put myself through the ringer figuring out how to gently and kindly respond to everything, whether it was nasty or not, whether it was thoughtful or not. I was always like kind of respond with kindness, respond with gentleness, and model kindness and gentleness. And I do still do that sometimes, but it took a tremendous amount of emotional labor to do that. And so these days, I never hesitate to just delete something if it makes me feel bad feelings. I feel like that is fully my right. I've talked off all of my lip product. Oh, Daisy, my dear Daisy. Daisy asks, I'd love to know how your YouTube channel has changed your life in a way that you hadn't expected, something that you were surprised about, if there is any. Yeah, my YouTube channel has changed my life in a lot of ways that I didn't expect. But the thing that springs most aggressively to mind is something that I kind of touched on. I think I touched on this in my final video of my No Buy year. I talked about the fact that I had gone through my life up until then feeling like I was just too much. Like I just would never, before starting my YouTube channel, before going through this process, I would never have guessed that so many people would want to spend time with me. Like it sounds weird to say it that way, and I almost feel like full of myself for saying it that way, but I'm just trying to articulate the reality, right? Like I'm making content where it's me talking, giving my opinions, reacting to things. I am the actor in the content that I make, and thousands of people watch the videos. That has changed. That the fact that that is true and that I've seen that it's true, that has changed my self-perception. It's changed my understanding of what kind of person I am to the world and how I move through the world. Now, obviously, I haven't gotten like a big head or anything. Like, I still have a pretty small YouTube channel, all things considered. And if anything, trying to make progress on social media makes you feel kind of bad about yourself because you see everyone else doing so well and getting all the views and all of this stuff. It's hard not to compare myself to my friends and to feel like I'm much less likable than they are. So I'm not saying that, you know, getting to the point where I'm at now on YouTube has turned me into some sort of monster of self-involvement and ego, but it has disrupted a notion that I had carried with me for my whole life up until this point, which was a notion that that there really is something quite wrong with me, and that a lot of people, the majority of people, would just be like, "Oh no, thanks. I don't really want to be around her. She's too loud, too opinionated, too tall, wears too much makeup, laughs too much." I don't know. Like I'm just kind of a big talky person. And the fact that this channel exists and that you guys are watching and that you're my people, it's like given me something that I didn't have. It's given me a little calm, a little straightness in my spine. It's empowered me as a person to do more and better work in the world, and that is tremendous. I had no idea that that was coming for me when I started my YouTube channel. Okay, Darcy has asked a great question that I think I can't answer in the video, but I do want to read the question to you and I'll tell you why I can't answer it now. Darcy says, "I'd love it if you could talk about tango. I Lindy Hop myself, which is another social folk dance. I'm curious about your thoughts on the relationship between tango, sensuality, and gender." I have, let me tell you, a lot of thoughts about the relationship between tango, sensuality, and gender. So many thoughts, in fact, that it's something that I've been doing some writing about. I feel like I can't answer this question in any form other than like a long personal essay, and I'm working on it. So at some point I'll put this work out. I'll share with the world in this long form how I feel about the relationship between tango, sensuality, and gender. But I don't want to like get on that now because it will just be like it's an essay. Maybe I can kind of try to give a little quick preview, which is basically that tango helped me to understand that masculinity and femininity are forces that are available to every person, that it doesn't matter the gender with which you're moving through the world, and it doesn't matter like the shape of your body and what parts you have in your body. That stuff is separate from, I mean, that stuff does matter, but it's separate from your masculinity and your femininity. So as a result of studying tango, I feel like I have a masculinity that is my own, that I foster, that I use, that it's like part of me. It comes through the screen, it comes out, and it's like it's just part of the way that I move through the world. I use my masculinity. I also have a femininity that I have fostered, that I have developed, that I use, and I move through the world with it. I have both, and they like, it's like they dance together. You know what I mean? That's what tango is, and it's not actually really about gender. It's about these kinds of power, being able to disconnect the ideas of masculinity and femininity from the idea of maleness and femaleness and men and women. That has been a tremendous tool for me. It has changed my life completely. So that's like at the core of the essay that that I'll publish someday. And you know, the sensuality part is in there too, but that's all I'm going to give you now, just a taste. Okay, Kiri is amazing. Kiri has listed some questions. Question number 1, are you okay? You know, no, I don't know if I'm okay. I mean, clearly I'm fine. Like I'm here, I'm doing it, I'm wearing this lace blouse. But this is just the weirdest ass year. It is so weird. And there are a lot of moments on a daily basis when I actually feel like I'm not okay. Um, because I've just really lost the plot with a lot of things. I'm struggling with stuff that I don't like struggling with. I'm currently really struggling with feeling less productive and less capable than I conceive of myself to be. I just hate it. Like earlier in the video when I admitted that since we've moved into this house, I have struggled to protect my writing time every morning and to sit down and do my routine where I write. I just hate that. I hate that journey for myself. I hate the journey for myself where I go through periods of time where I'm less productive and less effective than I want to be in my life. I just hate it. So I feel like I'm not okay. But I think that where I'm at right now is that I'm working every day to be okay with not being okay. And I'm doing better at that some days than others. But man, it's a good question because I think that a lot of us are going around right now during this pandemic and election year looking like it's like we look like we're okay, we sound like we're okay, we smell like we're okay, we taste like we're okay, but we're kind of not okay. And that just has to be okay. What are you reading, watching, and listening to right now? Love this question. I am watching something that I love a lot, and it's all thanks to many of you who recommended it. In the video in which I talked about Avatar: The Last Airbender, a lot of you recommended She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, and I started watching it, and it is amazing. I love it. So I've really been enjoying that. What am I reading right now? I'm reading what I am like literally in the middle of reading right now are some of those books about the teaching of poetry and the reading of poetry. I'm just like getting back into, there's a book called The Poet's Companion that I really love. There's James Longenbach's book about the art of the poetic line that I'm like halfway through again right now. So that's kind of what I've been consistently reading. In terms of novels, I'm between them. But I am about to read Transcendent Kingdom. I have it on my bedside table, was just published by Ya Jesse, who is the writer of Homegoing. I've talked about that before on my channel. If you've never read Homegoing, literally what are you waiting for? I will link it down below. And Transcendent Kingdom is Ya's most recent book. It's her second book. I can't wait to start that. What am I listening to right now? My own playlists from Spotify. Those are public. I'll link them down below too. So Jessica S says, will you tell us about your time being an actress in Belgium? I've been filming this video for like 2.5 hours. I don't think that I can go into it right now. What I'm gonna try to do is to do like a story time get ready with me where I just tell the whole story of the time that I was an actress in Belgium. So Izzy has asked, what are some of your favorite books or books you recommend for someone in their early 20s? This makes me think of like my favorite books. I am going to do the book tour and I'll tell you then because I have some of my favorite books there, but one particular book springs to mind. It's called Einstein's Dreams. It's by Alan Lightman. He's a physicist and it's fiction. Like it's a really lovely, slightly avant-garde, like readable, dreamy fiction piece. And it's basically just a set of portraits of different worlds, and in each world time works differently from the way that it actually works for us. So the way time works for us is that you move forward through time, like it's one directional, right? You move forward through time, you can't go backward through time. You're constantly moving. You move forward and you can see the past, but you don't know the future. That's the way that time works for us in our world. And in Einstein's dreams, in each world that he portrays, time works differently. So in one world, time speeds up the closer you are to the ground, and the further away you get from the ground, the slower time moves. And in one world, people have no memories. So they move through time in the same way we do, but they can't remember the past. They're just stuck completely in the present with no memories. So people are like always writing down what happens to them so that they can read their own book and know what has happened to them in their lives before. And in one world, everyone knows that the world's going to end. Like there's a preset date and time that time's going to end and that the world's going to end. And he talks about how people behave. And there's like a bunch of them. There's like 15 of them and 15 different ways in which time works. And, he kind of like draws each one out through to its logical conclusion. And I read that, I started reading that book, I think when I was a teenager. I've read it several times and it has really informed the way that I live my own life in the style of the passage of time that we've been dealt. So I highly recommend that book for you if you're in your early 20s and you're looking for something a little bit paradigm shifting to read. Aha! So C. Ann has asked about the masquerade ball that I once attended. That is another thing that's going to take a story time. I'll set it aside. I'll actually put it in like my calendar, my like YouTube scheduling calendar to film the Get Ready With Me with the story about being an actress in Belgium and the Get Ready With Me with the story about the masquerade ball. I'll do two. I tentatively promise to Get Ready With Me's story time videos about those two events in my life at some time in the future. Maybe not the very near future, but sometime in the future. Isabel has asked about my favorite literary character and the fictional characters to which I most relate. To which I will tell you the answer to my, do you remember that meme that went around where people were putting like, I think it was like 3 or 4 fictional characters, like pictures into a little quadrant that it was like, these are the 4, you put them all together and you get me. I feel like it was like a couple of years ago that I was going through. Mine was, it was all redheads. It was Anne of Green Gables, 100%. Pepper Ann. Do you remember Pepper Ann? Pepper Ann, dancing in her own parade. Pepper Ann, she's like 1 in a million. And then the third one was Captain Catherine Janeway from Star Trek Voyager. But I actually think there were only 3. I think it was Pepper Ann, Anne of Green Gables, and Captain Janeway. Put them all together and you get me. Y'all, I think I pretty much have to stop. There are a handful of questions at the end of the list that I would love to answer, but I'll definitely, again, go through on Patreon and give some answers and like continue the conversation there. But also, if it seems like it's called for, I could do this again. Like now that I've kind of popped the bubble and gotten over my fear of doing Q&A videos, if you guys seem to like it, or especially if my Patreons seem to like it, I'll do it again and I can answer more questions in the later one. And again, I'll do the video with Julia and that'll be kind of like a Q&A because we'll be answering some of the questions that were specific to this living situation. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for even caring about the answers to these questions. And please, whatever you do, don't forget to take extra good care of yourself, because that is what will make you the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.